Hello and welcome to World News on the Papyrus Global TV. I am Christiana Babayo, and here are the headlines. Ivory Coast ruling party strengthens parliamentary majority in elections. Controversy in DRC over alleged tolerance of anti-Tutsi rhetoric sparks backlash. Over 3,000 migrants die on dangerous roads to Spain as borders tighten. Sweden voices stronger support for Somalia after Israel recognizes Somaliland. US pledges $2 billion to United Nations aid programs amid foreign assistance cuts. Houthi leader warns Israeli presence in Somaliland would be a military target. UN Security Council members condemn Israel's recognition of Somaliland. And now news in full. The Rally for Hofwetists for Democracy and Peace (RHDP), Ivory Coast's ruling party, has significantly expanded its control of the National Assembly, securing 197 out of 255 seats in the recent legislative elections, roughly 77% of the legislature, according to final results announced by the country's Independent Electoral Commission. The outcome consolidates President Alassane Ouattara's grip on power just 2 months after his controversial re-election earlier this year, extending his influence across key political institutions. Voter turnout was relatively low, with only about 35% of registered voters participating, reflecting voter apathy and political divisions. The ruling party dominated in its strongholds in the north and made notable gains in southern and western regions, historically more competitive, highlighting its organizational edge. The main opposition Democratic Party of Côte d'Ivoire, PDCI, saw its representation slashed, while the party of former President Laurent Gbagbo, which had called for a boycott of the polls, failed to win any seats. Supporters of the expanded majority argue it will promote political stability and continuity of policy, while critics warn it could weaken democratic checks and reduce the space for effective opposition in Ivory Coast's political landscape. A growing controversy in the Democratic Republic of Congo (DRC) has erupted over alleged tolerance by authorities of anti-Tutsi rhetoric, following a series of inflammatory comments broadcast on national media and shared online. The debate intensified after President Felix Tshisekedi met with two Congolese expatriates from the United States. Discussions, officials said, focused on national unity and sovereignty. However, critics argued the meeting sent the wrong signal when one of the expatriates posted highly divisive and dehumanizing content online that praised violent actions against Kinyarwanda-speaking civilians, a population that includes many ethnic Tutsis. The issue was further inflamed when Major General Sylvain Ekenge, spokesperson for the Armed Forces of the DRC, made discriminatory remarks about Tutsi women on state television, prompting his suspension by the military high command. Authorities condemned those comments as incompatible with Republican values, stressing they did not reflect official government or military positions. More than 3,000 migrants lost their lives in 2025 while attempting perilous journeys to reach Spain, according to data compiled by the Spanish migration rights group Caminando Fronteras. The figure of 3,090 deaths recorded between January and mid-December comes amid stricter border controls and changing migration routes across the region. The majority of these fatalities occurred on the Atlantic route to the Canary Islands, long regarded as one of the world's most dangerous migrant crossings. The deaths recorded include 192 women and 437 children, highlighting the vulnerability of those risking the journey in search of safety or economic opportunity. Spanish authorities reported that just under 36,000 irregular migrants arrived by sea and land during the same period, a significant drop from over 60,000 in 2024, a decrease attributed largely to tighter border enforcement, including agreements with transit countries such as Mauritania, to curb departures. However, migrant rights advocates warn that the reduction in arrivals does not necessarily make the road safer. New departure points, including from Guinea and Algeria, have emerged, creating longer and more treacherous passages and exposing migrants to heightened risk of shipwrecks, dehydration, and exploitation by traffickers. Sweden has publicly reaffirmed its support for Somalia's unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity in response to Israel's controversial recognition of Somaliland as an independent state, a move that has sparked diplomatic backlash across the Horn of Africa and beyond. In a statement on social media, the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs echoed positions similar to those of the European Union, African Union, and United Nations, emphasizing that Somaliland remains part of the Federal Republic of Somalia under international norms. Sweden's stance underscores concern that unilateral recognition could undermine the long-standing principle of territorial integrity upheld by regional and global bodies. The Israeli decision to recognize Somaliland, which declared independence in 1991 but has never before received formal diplomatic status, has drawn criticism from Mogadishu and its allies, who view the move as inconsistent with international law and a potential threat to regional stability. Sweden's support for Somalia reflects broader European diplomacy aimed to preserve established state boundaries while encouraging dialogue and negotiated solutions between conflicting parties. The EU has similarly urged meaningful negotiations between Somaliland and the Somali federal government to address long-standing governance and political differences without escalating tensions. We will now go on a short break, and when we come back, the news will continue. Stay tuned.
The Papyrus Global, we don't just cover events, we create cinematic experiences. From red carpets to birthdays, gala dinners, and your fairy tale weddings, we bring your moments to life with high-tech precision. Our gadgets are smarter, our lenses sharper, and our team simply world-class. Trust the Papyrus Global to tell your story in the boldest, brightest way possible.
Welcome back, and now the news will continue. The United States government has pledged $2 billion in humanitarian funding to the United States, a move designed to cushion the impact of deep foreign assistance cuts that have dramatically reduced global aid flows. This contribution, announced on 29 December 2025, comes as UN agencies struggle to respond to a growing slate of humanitarian crises with sharply diminished funds. The $2 billion pledge, while positioned by US officials as a reaffirmation of America's role as a leading donor, represents a fraction of previous US commitments to UN humanitarian efforts, which have reached nearly $17 billion in the past years. The reduced level of support reflects an ongoing decline in American and Western foreign assistance budgets under the current administration, which has urged UN agencies to adapt or shrink in response to tighter funding conditions. Critics have warned that the lowered contribution risks exacerbating hardship for vulnerable populations around the world, particularly in regions facing conflict, hunger, and disease. At a time when global needs are rising, UN aid officials have already launched the 2026 appeal for $23 billion, significantly lower than previous appeals due to funding shortfalls, and are preparing to make difficult program prioritization decisions amid the financial squeeze. Abdul Malik al-Houthi, leader of Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthi movement, has issued a stark warning that any Israeli presence in Somaliland would be considered a military target by his forces, escalating regional tensions following Israel's recent diplomatic recognition of the breakaway Horn of Africa territory. Al-Houthi's comments were broadcast as part of the group's public denunciation of Israel's decision to recognize Somaliland's independence, a move condemned by Somalia and many regional actors as a violation of Somali sovereignty. The Houthi leader described any Israeli deployment or presence in Somaliland as aggression against both Somalia and Yemen and a direct threat to regional security, especially given Somaliland's strategic location near the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden shipping lanes. The warning underscores fears that expanded diplomatic ties between Israel and Somaliland could bring greater strategic and military engagement into a volatile region, prompting militant groups and neighboring states to react defensively. Analysts note that Israeli recognition, the first such formal diplomatic step towards Somaliland since its 1991 self-declaration of independence, has inflamed geopolitical sensitivities around Red Sea security, and regional alliances. The Houthis, who control significant portions of northern Yemen, have engaged in intermittent conflict with Israel-aligned interests since late 2023, framed their threat as part of a broader opposition to what they see as hostile external interference in the Horn of Africa. The United Nations Security Council (UNSC) has delivered a strong rebuke of Israel's decision to recognize Somaliland as an independent state, with the majority of members condemning the move as a serious breach of international law and a threat to Somalia's sovereignty. The emergency session convened on 29 December 2025 saw diplomatic pressure mount on Tel Aviv as multiple governments underscored the primacy of territorial integrity under the UN Charter and long-standing international norms. At the session, the A3 group, comprised of Algeria, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and Guyana, issued a joint statement denouncing the recognition as a flagrant assault on the unity and territorial integrity of Somalia, and insisting that Somaliland remains legally incapable of entering into unilateral recognition agreements with other states. The bloc statement, read by Somalia's UN ambassador Abukar Dahir Osman, called for the decision to be declared null and void and urged all member states to uphold international law and reject any actions that undermine state sovereignty. Council delegates from across regions echoed these concerns, warning that the recognition could set a dangerous precedent and destabilize the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea region. Representatives from nations including the United Kingdom, China, Djibouti, and Turkey reaffirmed their support for Somalia's territorial integrity and stressed that any change in status must come through peaceful negotiation between Somalis themselves and not unilateral acts by external powers. While the United States, a permanent UNSC member and a close ally of Israel, defended Israel's prerogative to establish diplomatic relations, it clarified that it has not altered its own policy on Somaliland and reiterated its backing for Somalia's unity. And that's all we have on World News on the Papyrus Global TV. I am Christiana Babayo. Thanks for joining us.